I'm 77 years old, and I need to tell you something that might make you uncomfortable. I wasted 40 years of my life in a job I hated, a marriage that felt like living with a stranger, in a town where I never belonged. And you know what kept me there? Comfort. The terrible, soul-crushing comfort of the familiar. My name is David Baker. Last month, I attended the funeral of my oldest friend, Robert. We met when we were both 23, working at the same insurance company in Springfield. At his funeral, his daughter read from his journal. One entry, written 3 years before he died, said, "I wonder what my life would have been if I'd had the courage to leave when I knew I should." I sat in that church pew, and I couldn't breathe, because Robert and I had the exact same conversation 43 years ago. We were both 31. We both knew we were settling, and we both made promises to each other that we'd make changes within a year. He stayed until he retired at 65. He died at 74. I stayed until I was 72. Let me take you back. I was 25 when I took the job at Midwest Insurance. It was 1973. The position was supposed to be temporary, just something to pay the bills while I figured out what I really wanted to do. I'd studied literature in college. I wanted to write, maybe teach. Definitely not spend my days processing claims and filing paperwork in a gray cubicle under fluorescent lights that hummed like dying insects. But the job paid well, better than teaching would have, better than the struggling writer's life I'd romanticized. So I told myself I'd stay for 2 years, save money, then make my move. 2 years became 5. At 30, I met Linda at a company mixer. She was nice, pretty enough. We had things in common. We both liked old movies. We both came from small towns. We both wanted kids eventually. It wasn't passionate, but it felt reasonable, safe. We got married 8 months later. On our wedding night, lying in that hotel room in Niagara Falls, I remember thinking, this is fine. This is what adults do. Romance fades anyway. I was 30 years old, and I was already talking myself into settling. Linda wanted to stay in Springfield. Her family was there. Her job was there. And honestly, I didn't fight it, because fighting it would have meant having a real conversation about what I wanted. And I wasn't even sure anymore. The writing dream had faded into something I didn't talk about. When people asked what I did, I said insurance and changed the subject. When I was 35, my boss offered me a promotion. Middle management. More money. More responsibility. More years of guaranteed employment. I took it even though accepting it meant I was choosing to stay. Really stay? That night, I sat in my car in our driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. I knew what I was doing. I knew I was closing a door. But the mortgage was due. Linda was pregnant with our second child. And the new salary meant we could afford the bigger house we'd been looking at. So I went inside. I told Linda the good news. She was thrilled. I was 41 when Robert and I had that conversation I mentioned earlier. We were at Murphy's Bar after work on a Friday, both of us a few beers in. He'd just gotten passed over for a promotion he deserved, and I'd spent the day in a meeting that could have been an email. "I hate this," Robert said. "I genuinely hate this. I've been here 16 years, and I can't remember the last time I didn't dread Monday morning. So leave," I said. "Where would I go? I'm 41 years old. I've got a mortgage, 2 kids and braces. Karen's car needs replacing. I'm stuck." I took a long drink of my beer. "We're not stuck. We're comfortable. There's a difference." Robert looked at me. "Are you telling me you'd leave? Just walk away from the steady paycheck, the benefits, the retirement plan you've been paying into for years?" I opened my mouth to say yes, to say I would, to say we both should. Instead, I said, "Probably not." We both laughed, but it wasn't funny. Robert made me promise that within a year, we'd both make a change. Any change, a different job, a different city, something to prove we weren't just going to coast until we died. Within a year, Robert bought a boat. I planted a vegetable garden. We never talked about leaving again. My 40s blurred into my 50s. The kids grew up. The house needed repairs. Linda's mother got sick, so we had another reason to stay in Springfield. My job became something I did on autopilot. Competent enough to keep getting raises, disengaged enough that I felt like a ghost in my own life. At night, Linda and I would sit in the living room watching television. We'd go entire evenings without having a real conversation, just commentary on whatever show we were half watching. Safe observations about the weather, the neighbors, what needed fixing around the house. I remember thinking, is this it? Is this what the rest of my life looks like? But I never said it out loud. because saying it out loud would have meant doing something about it. When I was 53, Linda's sister moved to Colorado. She kept sending us pictures. Mountains, hiking trails, a completely different life. We should visit sometime, Linda would say. Maybe next year, I'd reply. We never went. My 50s became my 60s. The kids moved away, Chicago and Boston. They built lives that looked nothing like ours. My daughter became a documentary filmmaker. My son worked for a nonprofit helping at-risk youth. They were both doing work that mattered to them. During Christmas visits, they'd talk about their lives with this energy, this engagement. And I'd sit there in my worn recliner, nodding and smiling, feeling like I was watching their lives through a window I couldn't open. After they left, the house felt emptier than it ever had. I retired at 65. Everyone said I'd love retirement. All that free time, all those possibilities. But here's what nobody tells you about retirement. It doesn't magically make you into someone who knows how to embrace possibility. If you've spent 40 years choosing comfort over growth, retirement just gives you more time to realize what you've become. I played golf. I watched television. I went to the hardware store even when I didn't need anything, just to have somewhere to go. Linda joined a book club. I told her I was happy for her, but I didn't join, because joining would have meant being vulnerable with strangers. Admitting I hadn't read a novel in 30 years despite my literature degree. I was 68 years old, and I was still choosing comfort over growth. But here's the part that haunts me. It wasn't until I was 72 that everything changed. Linda had a stroke. We were eating breakfast. She was reading the newspaper, and I was scrolling through my phone. She made a sound, not quite a word, just a small noise of confusion. When I looked up, her face had gone slack on one side. I called 911. The ambulance came. They saved her life. But in the hospital, waiting to hear if she'd be okay, I had 6 hours to sit in that plastic chair and think about our 41 years of marriage. And you know what I realized? I couldn't remember the last time I told her I loved her. Couldn't remember the exact date. Couldn't remember doing it at all in recent years. We'd said, love you, as shorthand when hanging up the phone. But actually sitting across from her, holding her hand, and saying, I love you, with presence and intention? Years, maybe decades. I couldn't remember the last time we'd had a conversation that wasn't about logistics. Doctor appointments, bills, what we needed from the grocery store. I couldn't remember the last time I'd surprised her. Planned something, suggested we try something new together. We'd been living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, and we'd become strangers who shared an address. And it was my fault, because every time there'd been a choice between comfortable and meaningful, I'd chosen comfortable. Linda recovered. Mostly. She lost some mobility on her left side, but her mind stayed sharp. The doctor said she was lucky. Sitting next to her hospital bed, watching her sleep, I made myself a promise. I was 72 years old, and I was done settling. The first thing I did was join Linda's book club. It sounds small, but you have to understand, I was terrified. These were people who'd been meeting for 5 years. They knew each other. They had inside jokes. I was the old guy who couldn't even remember what book they'd read last month. But I showed up. That first night, I sat in a stranger's living room with 8 women and 2 other men, and we talked about a novel I'd barely understood. I admitted I was lost. I admitted I hadn't read a book for pleasure since college. I admitted I had no idea what I was doing there except that I wanted to stop sleepwalking through my life. One of the women, Margaret, who was 83, smiled at me and said, "Welcome to the club. We've all been where you are." I started reading again. Really reading. Not skimming articles on my phone, but sitting down with actual books and disappearing into them. The second thing I did was start talking to Linda. Actually talking. One night, about a month after her stroke, I turned off the television. She looked at me, confused. "I want to talk to you," I said. "About what?" "About us. About anything. I want to know what you think about things. I want to tell you what I think. I want to have a conversation that matters." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't know if I remember how to do that." "Me neither," I said, "but I want to try." We started small. I asked her what she'd liked about the book her club was reading. She told me about a story from her childhood I'd never heard. I told her about regretting never pursuing writing. Some nights, the conversations felt awkward, forced, like we were 2 people on a first date who weren't sure they liked each other. But slowly, so slowly, we started to remember who we were, who we'd been before we'd settled into our comfortable, silent routine. The third thing I did was leave Springfield. We didn't move permanently. Linda's doctors were there, and she wasn't ready for something that dramatic. But I bought a used RV. I told Linda I wanted to spend 3 months driving across the country. I wanted to see the places we'd never gone. I wanted to meet people we'd never meet if we stayed in our living room. She thought I'd lost my mind. "We're in our 70s, she said. "People our age don't just take off in an RV." "Why not?" I asked. She didn't have an answer. We left that spring. Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, California. We stayed in campgrounds. We hiked short trails that accommodated Linda's limited mobility. We sat by campfires with strangers and heard their stories. In Sedona, I signed up for a writing workshop. Me, at 73 years old, sitting in a circle with people decades younger, trying to remember how to shape sentences into something meaningful. I was terrible at first. My writing was stiff, formal, dead on the page. But I kept showing up. And somewhere around week 3, something clicked. I wrote a piece about Robert, about that conversation at Murphy's Bar, about all the years we'd spent settling. The instructor, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, read it and said, "This is real. This is alive. Keep writing from this place." I cried in my RV that night. Linda held my hand and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We spent 3 months on the road that first year. We've done it every year since. I'm 77 now. Linda's 76. We've been married 46 years. The last 5 have been the best, because I finally stopped settling. Here's what I need you to understand. Comfort is not the same thing as happiness. Safety is not the same thing as fulfillment. Staying is not the same thing as building a life. You tell yourself you're being responsible, practical, realistic. But what you're really doing is choosing the slow death of settling over the terrifying possibility of growth. Every day you wake up and choose comfort over growth. You're choosing to become a smaller version of yourself. You're choosing to live a life that fits inside the boundaries you've already established instead of expanding those boundaries to fit the life you could have. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but I have responsibilities. I have bills. I have people depending on me. I had all that too. I had a mortgage, 2 kids, a wife, a job with benefits, and a retirement plan. I had every reason to stay comfortable, and I still should have chosen growth. Because here's what nobody tells you. Your responsibilities don't disappear when you choose growth. You can be responsible and choose to expand your life. They're not mutually exclusive. You don't have to quit your job tomorrow and move to Bali. You don't have to blow up your life. But you do have to stop settling. In small ways at first, then bigger ones. Start having the conversations you've been avoiding. With your partner, with yourself, about what you actually want. About whether the life you're living is the life you'd choose if you were starting over. Try the thing you've been putting off. The hobby, the class, the trip, the career change, the creative project, the relationship repair. Stop waiting for the perfect time. There is no perfect time. There's only now and later and never. And here's the hardest truth. Settling gets easier the longer you do it. Your world gets smaller. Your comfort zone shrinks until it's so tight you can barely breathe, but it feels normal because it's all you know. At 30, I told myself I'd change things in 2 years. At 35, I told myself after the kids were older. At 41, Robert and I promised we'd make a change within a year. At 53, I said maybe next year we'd visit Colorado. At 65, I thought retirement would magically transform me. I wasted 47 years waiting for the right time. The right time was always now. Robert died never having written that novel he talked about, never having taken that trip to Scotland his grandfather came from, never having told his family how much he resented spending 40-plus years in a job that made him miserable. He settled until settling was all he knew how to do. I have 5 years on him, maybe 10 if I'm lucky. And every single one of those years feels precious in a way the first 72 didn't. Because I'm not settling anymore. I'm growing. Still, at 77. Last month, I published my first essay in a small literary journal nobody's heard of. It paid nothing. It doesn't matter. What matters is I did it. I chose growth over comfort. Last week, Linda and I had a conversation about something that scared us both. We talked about her fear of dying, my fear of losing her, the ways we've hurt each other over the years, the ways we want to love each other better in whatever time we have left. It was uncomfortable, vulnerable, raw. It was real. That's what growth looks like. It's uncomfortable and scary, and sometimes it fails, and you look foolish. But it's alive. Settling feels safe. but it's death by 1,000 small surrenders. It's choosing the known prison over the unknown possibility. I'm 77 years old. I don't have time to waste anymore. Neither do you. You think you're 30, 40, 50, and you have time. You think you'll make changes when things settle down, when you have more money, when the kids are grown, when you retire. But time doesn't work the way you think it does. It doesn't stretch to accommodate your procrastination. One day you're 35, telling yourself you'll make a change soon. The next day you're 65, wondering where your life went. And then you're 77, writing to strangers on the internet, begging them not to make your mistakes. Don't settle because it's comfortable. Choose growth, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. Start today, not tomorrow, not next year. Today, have the conversation you've been avoiding. Take the class, write the thing, book the trip, tell the truth, try the new thing, expand your life, because you can't get the years back. Trust me, I've tried, but you can choose differently starting right now. The choice is yours, but make it now, before comfortable becomes permanent, before settling becomes who you are. I'm 77. Linda's 76. We're planning another trip this spring. I'm writing every morning. We're learning to paint together. Both of us terrible, both of us laughing at our mistakes. We're growing. Finally, don't wait until you're 72 to start. If this story means something to you, share it with someone who's settling. Leave a comment about the thing you've been putting off. Subscribe if you want more honest conversations from someone who learned these lessons the hard way. Your life is happening right now, not someday. Right now, choose growth.